Coder Academy Term 1 Assignment 3 project review by myself, Xander. This project specifically was creating a terminal-based application written in Python. For my assignment, I've decided to create a program used to assist a user in making combat more efficient in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, specifically for the Barbarian class. The app itself uses several Python modules, such as Colored, D20, OS, JSON, and Math. The program defines multiple functions to then provide the following features to the user. So you can create a character sheet and save the data to a JSON file. You can update that character sheet. You can load the JSON file and enter into combat. During the combat round, various bonuses are automatically calculated based on the character sheet and the user's input. This keeps repeating until combat is finalized. Once combat is finished per the user's input, a summary is then saved in a text file. Walking through the program, so you first initialize the application with a setup bash script. This checks to make sure the user has Python installed and then imports all the relevant modules into a virtual environment that is created at the same time. The application is then launched with a run script, which then brings you to the program itself. So the ASCII art just being a dragon with a print command, and the colored text you see throughout this program is provided through the colored module. Originally, you have the 4 menu points to add a character, update a character, enter combat, or to exit the program. Throughout the program itself, if a user tries to update a character or enter combat when a character sheet doesn't exist, obviously this isn't possible. So it'll inform the user in the console and take it back a menu stage. If you go through the character creation prompt, the first option in the program, it'll ask you a series of questions about your level, what weapon you're choosing, your strength modifier, and throughout this kind of process, it ensures that your input is matched up with basically a specified dictionary of expected outputs. If it doesn't, it will then tell you it's an invalid input. The user inputs and then calculations for the other character variables are then stored in a JSON file shown in the bottom left. If you go to update a character by selecting the second menu option, you're brought to another sub-menu to choose to either update your level, your strength modifier, or your weapon. This will then load up your JSON file, change that variable based on your input, and then update that JSON file. Once a user enters into combat, the JSON file is loaded at the start and the value is set to a dictionary. That JSON file is then closed, so we're not opening and closing it continuously. During combat, the user can choose to enter rage, attack with advantage, disadvantage, or roll normally. Then based on that user input, a roll to hit function is called and the damage amount is calculated. So this is using the D20 module for the dice rolling behavior. Based on the JSON file, so the character level sets multiple different variables. One of the more important ones is the amount of turns you can have whilst raging. We'll talk about that more later. And then also how many times you can attack per turn. Combat data as well is shown in the console and then saved to a text file at that same time. So this is the example text file here. They're saved in a combat summaries parent folder, and the text file name will follow the structure of combat _ summary _ and then it's n+1, where n is the existing amount of combat files. If you want to exit the program, the 2 ways of doing that, of course, with a keyboard interrupt, or by using the menu options. Either way, you'll have the cute little farewell dragon. Running through the code very quickly here. So the create character sheet is probably the first function that most people will interact with directly. Per the Google style guide, it recommends multiple smaller functions versus a larger singular function. So this calls other functions within it, the get input and calculate values, just to allow for code that is smaller and easier to troubleshoot and refactor in the future. Based on the input from the end user, this will then create a dictionary with those values and then dump them into a JSON file, showing the calculate values function on the right-hand side, effectively just a series of if-else statements and using the math module to round up numbers as appropriate to calculate the rage bonus, how many attacks the character can do per turn, its brutal critical damage, and its proficiency bonus. 2 smaller functions that are used quite frequently in the program are to check that the character sheet exists and then to load the character sheet into a dictionary and then return that dictionary. So these are checking specifically for the file not found errors and a JSON decode error. The file not found error you'd see more commonly. The JSON decode error would be fairly rare in this circumstance. The reason why we're using these as separate functions is that the Google style guide specifically recommends local not global variables, so we can then use these local variables, return them into the other function, and keep going that way. Going through the update character sheet functions, there are 3 separate functions here, but they all behave relatively Similarly, again, following the style guide recommendations of multiple smaller functions. Effectively, this function will load up the character sheet JSON file, capture user input, and then rewrite the new data to the existing JSON file. The largest function in the program by far is the combat round function. A few things going on here. So I'd say absolutely, given more time, I would love to continue to refactor this function down, potentially split it up into smaller blocks. So this uses a while loop to continue the combat until specifically ended by the player. And there are a lot of nested if statements here. So for any one of the end user's inputs, one of four things could happen. Console and text output function is used to print, as the name suggests, both to the console and to the text file at the same time. Continuing on with the combat round function, we get input to break the function at the user's request. Like we were discussing before, so per the Dungeons & Dragons rule set, below level 15, a barbarian can only rage for 10 consecutive turns. If they're above level 15, they can rage indefinitely, so we have an inbuilt rage counter that'll basically just keep incrementing per what round we're at. The entire function itself is wrapped in a try except block just to ensure that there isn't any incorrect data in that JSON file, which from my understanding of this would typically only happen if that was manually manipulated. This function itself, though, is about 115 lines of code and is the only function to fall outside of Google Style Guide's recommendation of about 40 lines of code per function. The Style Guide does say that long functions are sometimes appropriate. There's no hard limit, but I think absolutely, given more time, this could be broken down and optimized further. So discussing the kind of final two functions I'd like to touch on here, which are the combat summary file and the console and text output functions. Firstly, with the combat summary file, this function creates a parent folder in the root folder of the application if it doesn't exist, and then just using some basic string slicing, it will increment that file name per file. The console and text output, as the name suggests, is used to both print to the console and then also to the text file itself. This is used for the combat cycle. It uses the asterisk args for a variable amount of arguments. The keyword arguments aren't used in the program currently, but I've left it there in case it should be used in future functionality. So this could be used for things like line termination or other formatting changes. Reflecting on the project, some of the challenges. So originally I planned to use a CSV file for the character sheet, as that was a more comfortable option. We'd used it more in class, but further research led me down the road of using a JSON file as a more appropriate option. So I had to get a bit more time learning about how that would operate. My biggest issue going to this project is that I thought that outputting to both a console and a text file at the same time would be easy and straightforward. It wasn't. So this is where I spent a lot of time testing and trialing different things and reading a bunch of Stack Overflow and reading Python documentation to get a function that worked in the way I wanted it to. The error handling as well was challenging just because obviously I'm going to the program knowing what it should do and what should be done from a user's perspective. And so trying to inverse that and try to capture errors that occur when someone only uses a program in a way it isn't designed to be used was fun but difficult. From an ethical perspective, the kind of two things that stand out are the balance of the dice rolls. So using the D20 module, it's open source and designed by the folks at Dungeons & Dragons. So the user can be confident that the rolls are actually random. The game is poorly supported from an accessibility perspective. All input and output is text-based though, so an end user could use a screen reader for this. And all the menu options are differentiated by both colors, text, and numbers. My favorite part about this project is I've kind of had this idea for a while, but I've just lacked the skills to create a finalized product that met what I wanted it for. So it was very rewarding over these last few weeks to kind of see this come to light. Testing was a really fun challenge, but I really enjoyed trying to find a way to capture unexpected errors and just using the PyTest module to kind of make sure my program was robust as possible. Overall, though, this project has been a great developmental experience. Looking forward to whatever's next. Thank you.